Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Hey listeners, welcome to Extrology, insights and inspiration for a life of purpose. Today, in the last of our review of 2024's episodes, I wanted to revisit an episode that holds deep personal significance for me. Earlier this year, I shared my journey with multiple sclerosis, a diagnosis that was life-changing in many ways, but also a turning point in how I view resilience, growth, and purpose. Opening up about my MS was not an easy decision, but it was an important one. Extrology is all about sharing stories of overcoming adversity and finding strength in the face of uncertainty. And this was my opportunity to put into practice the lessons I've learned from so many of our incredible guests. This episode marked a big step for me, not just in dealing with my diagnosis, but in living authentically and finding ways to turn challenges into growth. Whether you've heard it before or are listening for the first time, I hope it inspires you to embrace your own story with courage and purpose as we head into the new year. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. So why am I talking about MS? Well, before I explain, I'd like, if I may, to take you back to 2013. I'm sure there'll be many of you that can picture the scene. I, like many parents of what at that age was a 10-year-old boy, as well as having an older daughter. But at that stage, this particular story is relevant to a 10-year-old boy. And like many parents, mothers and fathers, I was on a touchline watching my son play football. In fact, actually, I was the coach of his team. We were playing in a football tournament. He'd have been, as I say, 10 years old. And during that tournament, things were going great. We were having great fun. The boys were really enjoying the competition. We'd gotten to semi-finals, went to the dreaded penalty shootout. And during that penalty shootout, certainly, although I was doing my utmost to remain calm externally and not pass on any of my attention to those poor boys, I was really willing them inwardly to win. I'm incredibly competitive, and I was doing my best to quell my competitive instincts so that they could relax, but at the same time, inwardly willing them to win. And I had what I would best describe as a lightning bolt moment. And what I mean by that is quite literally, at the height of the penalty shootout, what felt like an intense electric shock that went right the way through my system. It didn't scare me, it did alarm me, and as quick as it came, it went. It was the strangest feeling. I had no idea why it had happened. I had no idea what it was. And like all good men, I ignored it for quite some considerable time. But what I was left with, as I guess a result of the aftermath of that incident, was what I would best describe over the coming weeks as a series of like permanently, like I was electrified from the knee down. So in both legs, this sensation never left me of kind of having ants running up and down my skin. It was like a prickly skin, didn't hurt, wasn't uncomfortable. It's just unusual and slightly disconcerting, but again, pretty much ignored. It had gotten to the point, it certainly wasn't preventing me from doing anything, but eventually, after several serious conversations with my nearest and dearest, it was decided that perhaps it was worth getting it checked out. So again, this is all through kind of 2013 time. These things are never dealt with fast. That's no reflection on the wonderful people at the NHS. It's just the way it works. I had a series of tests to try and understand, nerve tests, all sorts of things, to try and understand what it was that was causing this kind of pins and needles feeling in my legs. And ultimately, over the course of about 12 months, I had a series of scans, MRI scans, CT scans, and ultimately one very clever consultant decided to take a look at my spine in a slightly different way, took a look at my spine rather than from the side, took a look from the top down, and what they found was that I had a pinch, C2 and C3, a couple of discs at the top of my neck, causing a pinch on my spinal cord. The upshot of which was an operation to remove those discs, which happened in 2014, and incredible operation, 2 discs removed, a piece of carbon fibre dropped down my spinal cord, and hey presto, all resolved. Within 24 hours of having a spinal operation, I walked out of a hospital ward and was home. So period of recuperation over 6 weeks, no driving, but nothing untoward, before I started to notice after about 6 weeks that actually the pins and needles hadn't gone. They certainly weren't any worse. If anything, they were marginally better, but they hadn't gone. So I'd had these discs taken out. I had needed to have them taken out because there was a pinch on my spinal cord, which would have over time gotten worse and caused not all too considerable difficulties, but nonetheless, that wasn't what was causing the pins and needles, it would appear. So again, I kind of thought, well, I've had the operation, I'll ignore it. I then moved forward to January 2016, and I'm admitted to hospital with, I won't bore you with the full story, but I was admitted with what they were concerned was a suspected stroke. I'd been having a series of really blinding headaches. I felt dreadful and ultimately lost movement in my left arm, and a series of those pins and needles I referred to in my leg had spread all the way up my left-hand side of my body, were in my face. Wasn't really sure what was going on, but was treated in a double quick time by incredible people at Southampton General Hospital, admitted me. Within an hour of being admitted, I'd had a CT scan, MRI scan, all sorts of things. The good news for me was that there wasn't a stroke, no evidence of a stroke. I hadn't had a stroke. The bad news was that they'd found a series of lesions, which is sort of scarring. There were 5 on my brain. And that word alone, if I'm brutally honest, scared the hell out of me, freaked me out. And I was then in hospital for a week, felt really unwell. Couldn't give you a definitive description of what felt unwell. I just know I didn't feel great. And a series of kind of tests, all of which were relatively inconclusive, but that ultimately combined, including a lumbar puncture, which found some protein in my spinal cord. And in walks the consultant who's been reviewing all of the tests that I'd undergone. And it's kind of not good news when a consultant comes in surrounded by junior doctors, pulls up a chair and sits down by the side of your bed. You kind of know when they sit down that this is going to be a serious conversation. And I remember my consultant having said to me, Lee, right, we found proteins in your spinal fluid, which is not good news. And that combined with the lesions that we're seeing on your brain, the symptoms that you're evidencing, would lead us to conclude the likelihood is that you have multiple sclerosis. Not definitive. It is incredibly difficult to diagnose, and I want to make that clear here. Incredibly difficult to diagnose. But the likelihood is that you've multiple sclerosis. To which my response at that time was, oh, thank you, that's great. Which sounds like a ridiculous thing to have said, but it was the first thing that sprung to my mind, not least because I was catastrophizing what might have been, and I pretty much convinced myself I had a brain tumour. That's what these funny things were in my brain. I'd very cleverly done some sensible self-diagnosis and felt that that was going to be the conclusion. And so there was a sense of relief when it was called something to which my first thought was, oh, well, that's not going to kill me. Hence the response was, oh, great. Anyway, move forward from 2016, a whole series of tests over the next 12 months, ultimately an MRI scan, and lo and behold, those lesions 12 months later that had been found in my brain had gone. And there didn't appear to be any real scarring. There didn't appear to be any real long-term effects. I felt great. Hadn't had any repercussions of what I'd been admitted to hospital with. So I just kind of cracked on with my life. I was discharged from my consultant. No, you're good. If anything happens, I remember quite vividly him saying to me, if at any point you should lose control of your bowel or your bladder, then I suggest you come and see me again very quickly. But other than that, I don't need to see you. All good. So here we go. I cracked on with life. I now want to bring you forward to June 2023, and I've had a whole series of strange things going on, balance issues, bladder issues, nothing dramatic, but constantly needing to go to the toilet. And it's like got to go now. Sorry to be graphic, but there's no waiting for that. I put that down to being a man of a certain age. Turns out that wasn't quite the case. But I'd had a number of issues, lots of pins and needles, occasional loss of true limb mobility. Occasionally I'd stumble off a curb, I'd do clumsy things, I'd fall. Nothing that I could say to you was that dramatic, but that accumulatively led me to believe that things were not quite as they were. And then I had a number of these sort of sensations in my head which weren't right. And I can't define them or describe them, but it just felt like there was something not quite right and I felt unwell. The upshot to which was more scans and quite clearly the return of lesions and some scar tissue in the brain. I think that's how it was described. I should say, for the purposes of this podcast, I am no medical expert. So anything that I might say today, if it sounds misleading, I can only apologise. I'm going for my recollection as to what I experienced. I'm not doing this from the moment. I'm just going from memory. It's sort of how it felt at the time. I had these strange things going on in my head and I was concerned about it. The upshot to which was more lesions, more diagnosis, more tests, and a conclusion that yes, I did indeed have multiple sclerosis. Specifically, I have relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. I'll come on to what that means in due course. But that there was a sense that at that point, it was no longer a case that I could just carry on life regardless, and that I was going to need to start to take some form of treatments to alleviate the progressive development of my MS. So why have I never talked about this before? Well, first and foremost, Extrology was established on a mission to educate, inspire, and entertain. And I've always felt that my MS story, frankly, does none of those things. I'm also a firm believer in a good podcast being all about the guest. I genuinely believe every guest that's been on my show, I'm sure, will confirm this, that prior to even recording, I make the point that it's their show. My job is simply to facilitate the platform for them. So I've kind of never wanted this show to be about me. And that's partly because podcasts that turn me off are where all too often the host tries to make the show all about themselves. Even if they have a guest, they'll always turn it back on themselves. And I just don't like that. I think also fear, undeniably, has had a huge part to play. And that's fear as to the reaction, fear as to how I would be perceived as a consequence of what I'm sharing, and a lack of confidence in sharing the message. And that kind of flies in the face of what, frankly, all of my guests have done. They've all come on and shared overwhelming circumstances, events, challenges, conditions, illnesses, diseases, and I applaud them for that hugely. And it kind of makes me feel like a bit of a hypocrite when I'm not sharing my own journey and my own challenges with my audience. So why am I talking about it now? It's been a journey of understanding, adapting, and learning, frankly. But I did want to share this part of my life with you, not just as a story, but as an opportunity to explore what MS is, how it affects those of us that are living with it, and the incredible research and community support that is surrounding it. So first and foremost, what is multiple sclerosis? Well, like I say, I'm no medical professional. This is just today about my understanding of the disease that I have. It's a condition where the immune system mistakenly attacks the protective covering of nerves in the brain and the spinal cord, which lead to a range of symptoms and challenges. We'll break down some of the science as we go through this morning in a way that's easy to understand, but basically that's what MS is. It's an attack on the immune system by your own body, and it affects everybody differently. And that's something that I've learned firsthand. So there is no, if you get MS, this will happen. Whilst there are some common symptoms, it's an incredibly unpredictable disease. It impacts daily life, work, and relationships in very, very, very different ways, depending on how it affects the individual at hand. I'm also going to share some surprising facts and figures about MS, like how many people live with it worldwide, the progress that has been made in understanding it, how it's much more common than many people realise, and it is a global issue. It's definitely one of those things that when you've got it, you realise lots of people kind of go, oh, I know someone, or me too. But it is it's perhaps not something that is talked about a huge amount. And I want to share it because I'm a great believer in awareness and understanding as being very powerful. I think that by learning more about MS, we can support each other better. We can help to advocate for necessary research and services, and importantly, build a community that's both informed and empathetic. So whether you or someone you know is navigating the disease, or you're simply here to learn something new, I'm really grateful that you're still with me, that you're here with me today, and let's dive a bit further in. So, as I may mention, what is MS? It's a chronic autoimmune disease that affects the central nervous system, including the brain and the spinal cord. That involves an immune-mediated process in which basically the body's immune system mistakenly attacks what's called myelin. So myelin is the fatty substance that surrounds and insulates the nerve fibers as well as the nerve fibers themselves. So that attack can cause a wide range of symptoms, and as I say, it affects individuals very, very differently. The symptoms vary greatly from person to person and can change in severity over time. So common symptoms include fatigue, which is utterly, utterly debilitating, albeit not something that I personally have suffered from. I'm very fortunate. Difficulty walking, numbness or weakness in one or more limbs, something certainly that I've had on occasions. Electric shock sensations with certain neck movements. I've certainly suffered with that. Tremors, not something I've experienced. A lack of coordination, definitely something I've experienced. And problems with vision, again, fortunately for me, not something I've suffered with. The disease can progress steadily, or people can experience relapses followed by periods of remission. And that is what I have. I have something called RRMS, or relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. It's the most common form of MS and accounts for about 85% of initial MS diagnosis. It's characterized by clearly defined attacks of new or increasing neurological symptoms, known as relapses or exacerbations, followed by periods of partial or complete recovery, which are referred to as remissions. During that relapse, an individual can experience new symptoms or the worsening of old symptoms. They can last for days or months before they gradually improve. The remission phase is that period where the disease does not progress, and the individual may recover fully or partially from the symptoms experienced during that relapse. However, some symptoms can remain and can become permanent. Unlike progressive forms of MS, where symptoms gradually worsen over time without distinct relapses and remissions, relapsing remitting MS involves clear cycles of relapse and recovery. The frequency and severity of relapses vary greatly among individuals, and it can, over time, progress to a secondary progressive form of MS. So it begins to progress more steadily over time without those relapses. I guess what else can I share? In terms of how you manage relapsing remitting MS, it typically involves treatments to reduce the number and severity of relapses, to slow the disease progression and manage symptoms. So these can include things like drugs, disease-modifying therapies, steroids to reduce inflammation that you might have during relapses, and various symptomatic treatments and rehab strategies to try and improve quality of life. A couple of facts and figures around MS. It's estimated that more than 2.8 million people worldwide have MS. Women are affected 2 to 3 times more often than men. And while MS can occur at any age, it's most commonly diagnosed in individuals between the ages of 20 and 50. There's no known cure, but there are treatments available. I've mentioned some of those just recently, and there is absolutely ongoing research, constant ongoing research, studies on the genetic and environmental factors that may contribute to the development of MS, as well as some really innovative treatments like stem cell therapies and myelin repair strategies. It's a really complex disease. The exact cause is not fully understood, but it's thought to involve a combination of genetic and environmental factors. So things that are currently known, It's an autoimmune disease, which I've mentioned. There is some evidence to suggest that genetics may play a role. So people with a first degree relative, such as a parent or a sibling with MS, might have a higher risk of developing the disease than not. However, there's been no single gene that has been identified as the cause of MS. It's likely that several genes are involved, each contributing to a small increase in the risk of developing the disease. Environmental factors have been associated with increased risk of MS. These would include things like a vitamin D deficiency. So low levels of vitamin D have been linked to a higher risk of MS. Smoking has been shown to increase the risk of developing MS. Viral infections, certain viruses, such as the Epstein-Barr virus, which causes infectious mononucleosis, have been suggested to trigger MS in people who are genetically predisposed to the disease. And geographical factors, believe it or not, I guess linked to that vitamin D deficiency. Geographical factors definitely have a big part to play. MS is more common in countries further from the equator, which might relate to things like sunlight exposure and vitamin D levels. And immune system malfunction. If you get the immune system's role in MS is a significant focus on research. People are really spending a lot of time, experts are spending a lot of time and money researching the body's immune system. And the theory is that the immune system becomes dysregulated and begins to attack the myelin, the CNS, although the reasons for the malfunction are still very much understudy. So as I say, there's just some background to MS. I'm not a medical expert. I oftentimes wonder how much I contributed to my own experiences of MS through stress. I would have once upon in my life worn stress as a badge of some kind of daft badge of honor. I considered that, successful people, however you want to define that, but in order to succeed in life, you pushed yourself to the nth degree. I think I pushed myself that hard that ultimately my body might well have said to me, that's enough. We're not going to give you cut you any more slack. You've pushed us too far. And this time you just pushed us over the edge. So I don't know as to what part stress has to play, but I do know that stress has a horrendous impact on the body and our systems. So, I'm sure that I didn't help myself by constantly seeking out stress and pushing myself to the nth degree, not living a healthy lifestyle, not prioritizing sleep, just being work to my detriment and my cost. I think that's caused me a lot of the issues that I suffer from today. So what do I do to deal with it? How do I try and keep it at bay? Well, it's important to stress everyone is different. Everyone will. I'm not suggesting that what works for me will work for you. I think you've just got to try and find a way of dealing with it as best you can. But, I prioritize exercise, particularly weights, because I think the stronger I can be, the better equipped I'm going to be able to deal with whatever my body might choose to throw at me. So I exercise every day, religiously, relentlessly. Sleep is a huge priority. I go to bed really early. Because I've always woken up really early, I make sure I get my 8 hours a night every night. It's kind of a non-negotiable. Sleep is really important. These are in no particular order. Cold treatments. I have a Lumipod. I love my cold plunge. I've been having a cold shower now for the best part of 4 years. Whether it's psychosomatic or not, it really does seem to make a difference. I'm really careful about what I eat. I absolutely smash the greens. I smash the healthy fats. I stay away from processed foods. I eat very little processed sugar. I still enjoy a beer a little too often, the truth be known, probably more so than I should. But, a little bit of what you like now and again, I kind of give myself a little bit of slack in that respect. Mindfulness, meditation is arguably I would suggest has had singularly the most important impact on my well-being and my overall sense of kind of feeling good. I'm really careful about how I listen to my body. I recognize I'm far from bulletproof. Once upon a time, I might have considered that I was. I'm clearly not. So if my body's saying slow down, I slow down. If my body's saying rest, I rest. If my body's saying go to sleep, I go to sleep. I spend lots of time outside. I love being in nature. I have a dog which I love to walk. So for me, it's the forest or a beach. But being outside, I just find really works for me. Natural light really works for me, and goodness me, the sunshine absolutely works for me. I can literally lap the sunshine up. Love the sunshine. So yeah, I've had to make some adjustments, but it doesn't have to change your life. I mean, the truth is, I'm incredibly lucky. I've just been skiing for the last week, having the most incredible time. I skied. Perhaps do I ski for as long and as hard as once I did? No. Do I think that's got anything to do with MS? No. I do think that's got everything to do with my age. I'm just not as fit and as strong as I used to be, but I can still do these things. I still get to play loads of sport. I still get to have fun. And I kind of have lots of playing around and trial and error to try and find things that work for me, that mean I can continue to enjoy this wonderful life. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this deeply personal episode. Sharing my journey with MS was one of the most challenging but rewarding steps I've taken this year. It's a reminder that resilience doesn't just come from overcoming challenges, but from learning how to grow through them. As you reflect on this story, I hope it inspires you to think about your own journey, how you face adversity, where you find strength, and how you can support others along the way. For me, it's been a year of learning, gratitude, and connecting with so many of you who've shared your own stories of resilience and growth. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more in-depth conversations. Follow us on social media for updates and exclusive highlights, and sign up for our newsletter at extrology.com for behind-the-scenes insights and early access to upcoming episodes. Before we close, I want to thank you all for being part of the Extrology community. Your support, feedback and shared experiences have made this an extraordinary year. As we head into the festive season, I wish you a time of peace, reflection and connection with those who matter most. No matter what you celebrate, I hope it's filled with joy and gratitude. And as we step into 2025, I encourage you to carry forward the lessons of resilience and purpose that we've explored together this year. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing more incredible stories with you in the new year. Take care, stay resilient, and have a wonderful holiday season. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.